I love camping, and I love figuring out how to have a lot of fun for not a lot of money. Or in other words, I'm cheap. We were tent campers for many years, but I wanted to take some longer road trips, and the setup and takedown was taking too long, especially with young kids involved. I have a friend who constructed a teardrop trailer, and I was instantly hooked. The concept of constructing my own camper for a fraction of the price of traditional campers was exactly what I wanted. Further, I don't really care for RV parks. I like being able to pull into any tent campsite or even any wide spot in a Forest Service road.
Today we're here with Mr. Jagor at Limekiln State Park, and we're going to be talking about how Mr. Jagor built his fabulous trailer and why.
Very carefully.
Is that it?
Yeah. So I was trying to figure out how to make the teardrop concept work for a family of 4.
Yay! It's Dad's trailer!
Then I came up with the Loft concept. On an 8-foot trailer frame, the front 6 feet could be for the bottom bed, and the back 6 or so feet could sit on top for a loft bed. That would leave about 2 feet in the front to access the loft, and 2 feet in the back for an outdoor kitchen. Now all I had to do was convince my wife, even though I had no instructions, no plans, and I had never done this before. So today is November 19th, 2018. And this is day 1 of my trailer project. And as you can see back here, I have an iron ton 5x8 trailer kit. This would form the frame or base structure of the trailer. And we'll see how this turns out. So I'm a chemistry teacher. I have some experience doing stuff around the house, but I'm not professional by any means. So this will be a work in progress, lots of trial and error, but should be a lot of fun too. I did have some experience, however, with building trailers. I built a small gear hauling camper to haul behind our crossover. That was a great lightweight setup for our crossover, but now that I had a truck, I wanted something that could house our beds and to make improvements on the kitchen setup. The frame assembly from the kit was straightforward. It simply bolted together with the included hardware. I also purchased a 2,000-pound trailer swing jack to support the front end of the trailer. After a year of use, I've been very happy with the frame, although I would like to upgrade the axle and tires at some point to something that is better for dirt roads and allows speeds greater than 55 miles per hour. I chose to assemble the wooden frame with 2x4s instead of plywood as in a typical teardrop design. This worked better for my design because the loft needed to be load-bearing and I intended the trailer to be more box-like than the typical curved teardrop. I installed L brackets to hold the boards by bolting them into the trailer frame. I used 5 8-foot 2x4s cut in half to make 10 4-foot high supports. The boards sat on top of the bolts, so I glued in some spacers for support. I got some pretty beefy L brackets. You can see the design there, and I got some lag screws to bolt into the wood. And on this trailer frame that I used, I was able to put one of the bolts and share with the bolt that was already there. This other one here I had to drill into the metal, so it needs some good drill bits for that. Then came the top beams. I bolted 2 8-foot 2x4s to the top of the sideboards. Then I added the boards that would support the loft between each of the sideboards using heavy brackets to support each board. I made the gap for the door about 2.5 feet wide, which resulted in the loft being short of a more standard 6-foot bed length, but 2 feet was simply not wide enough for the door. I needed a way to make the frame strong enough to handle the abuses of the road while also being lightweight. I decided that heavy cables were the key. I put 2 700-pound rated cables in an X shape to brace the side-to-side movement and tighten them with turnbuckles. Then 2 cables on each side of the frame and tighten them to brace against front and back movement. The cables have worked great. After a year and a road trip from California to Washington State, the frame hasn't budged or wiggled loose at all. I designed the front end to angle back at 20 degrees in order to provide the feel of a lounge chair and to help with aerodynamics. I put heavy brackets on the front of the trailer to support the boards and attach them at the base with straight brackets. Then I put another cable X in the front to brace the front half of the frame. So as you can see, it's pretty strong, pretty sturdy. I can shake around on this thing and it's not going anywhere. I used 0.418 inch thick plywood for the floor and the loft bed. I used 0.196 inch thick plywood for the interior non-load bearing walls. I had to put 1 inch spacer boards on the sides to give room for the cables behind the interior walls. After cutting everything to size, I pulled the plywood back out and glued a vinyl strip onto the floor. I put 0.196 inch plywood on the bottom of the trailer and put 3/4 inch styrofoam insulation in the gaps between the frame. Then I screwed the pre-cut plywood in place. I used a router to cut a rectangle for the heater vent. Then I measured the second panel of 0.196 plywood for the back, added 1/2 inch insulation, and screwed in the back panel. I had to cut some gaps in these panels to provide room for the cables, but all these gaps were covered over in the finished camper. I installed 12 volt and 5 volt electrical outlets for the interior bed along with a circuit breaker box. I ran electrical and thermostat wires down the left side of the trailer and taped in 3/4 inch styrofoam insulation on the sides. Then I screwed on 0.106 inch thick plywood to serve as the exterior wall underlayment. So what I'm doing is I'm putting some spacers in. So I cut off little pieces of 2x4s that I'm putting here on the top, and then along the inside I'm just putting some small pieces of 1/2 inch board, quarter inch board actually, 1/4 inch to match the size of those bolt heads. I decided that the best way to build the door would be to build it on the exterior plywood. So I added framing boards to the plywood with a 1/4 inch gap to the main door frame. I copied the dimensions of the 14 by 16 inch window that I purchased from Vintage Technologies, a Teardrop supplier, and cut the hole for the window with my router. I drilled holes from the inside to the outside to mark the corners of the doors. Then, using a board for a guide, I cut out the gaps between the door with a 1/4 inch bit on my router. The hinges are freezer hinges that I purchased from Amazon. I purchased 2 key-to-like latches from the Vintage Technology store on Amazon. The door is made. Lots of trial and error, lots of mistakes. Looking back on it, there's probably much simpler and faster ways to do it, which I'll do on the second door. Had some help here, my assistant. Now it's time for the aluminum siding. I used 1 gallon of carpet adhesive to glue the aluminum onto the plywood backing. Although I use thin plywood, when the aluminum is glued to the plywood, it forms a lightweight and strong composite. I also secured the aluminum to the frame with roofing screws with included rubber washers. I used 6 sheets of 0.040 thick 4x8 foot aluminum from a local supplier. I recut the door through the aluminum with the router, tracing over the previous cuts through the wood. For the second door, I skipped a step and put the aluminum on first, and then cut straight through the aluminum and the plywood in one go. This was a less forgiving method, but much faster. To each door, I purchased 0.125 inch thick and 2 inch wide aluminum tees from buymetal.com to provide weather sealing as well as structural support. The aluminum tees were secured to the door frame with roofing screws, as well as sealed with Loctite heavy-duty caulking. The corners of the aluminum tees were also sealed with caulking, and later I added some Flex Seal to further seal the corners. To provide a more firm seal, I purchased 3/4 inch aluminum angles from Home Depot and added them to 3 of the 4 sides of the door. The hinge did not allow enough room to place the angle on the 4th side. The aluminum angles were secured on the inside to the frame with regular wood screws and again sealed externally with Loctite caulking. Later I added weather stripping to the outer edge of the aluminum tees and an aluminum channel above the door to conduct the water away. This design has been effective for keeping water out. I cut the interior door plywood out of 0.106 plywood and cut 1/4 inch foam insulation to fit in the gaps between the framing boards. I screwed in the window from Vintage Technologies and sealed it with caulking as well as liquid rubber Flex Seal. I put a water tank in front of the trailer for better weight distribution and mounted a water pump underneath. I added 1x2 boards for support of the plywood for the front wall. I added 1x2 boards to finish the support of the lounge roof. I added interior .106 plywood and installed the interior 12-volt LED light along with the wiring. I added 3/4 inch foam insulation to the front. I cut the .106 plywood and cut the aluminum using aviation snips. I screwed in the plywood. Then I glued and screwed the aluminum panels in place with roofing screws. I used 3/4 inch aluminum angles to reinforce and seal each corner with Loctite caulking placed under each aluminum angle. I decided to add a flat aluminum piece to mend the two pieces of aluminum together on the sidewall, as well as provide extra structural support for the door hinges. Time to tackle the exterior kitchen. The kitchen counter had to rest just above the heater vent. I added 1x2 support boards on each side. Then I screwed in 1x2s to create the kitchen counter. I added 1x2 supports where the sink would go and used my router to cut the hole for the small bar sink I ordered from Amazon. I added the faucet that came with the 12-volt water pump from Amazon and ran both tubing and wires for the water pump through PVC conduit. The faucet includes a switch to control the water pump. I ran the conduit on the bottom of the trailer to the water tank and pump and drilled a hole in the kitchen floor for access. I installed the sink drain, also purchased on Amazon, so that it simply drains the gray water out the bottom of the kitchen. I do have a small tank that can attach to the output if needed. I installed the heater with the exhaust exiting the left sidewall. It is a powerful heater for a small space, so the trailer stays toasty even in freezing conditions. Then I installed the 55 amp hour deep cycle 12-volt battery from Batteries Plus Bulbs. I anchored both the heater and the battery with thin cable attached to the steel framing beams. I also tightened and supported the heater duct with thin cables. I installed a fuse box under the kitchen counter and ran wires to the kitchen LED light. I installed the solar controller unit under the counter on the left and attached the solar wires. The trailer has two 100-watt solar panels, which is enough to fully charge the battery in a few hours of full sun. I added cork boards on each side of the counter to provide organization and a wall to install the 12-volt and 5-volt kitchen outlets. I ran power to the heater and attached the thermostat wire by matching the wire colors. And so I have the solar controller hooked up right there. There's a fuse box under here. And let's see if we have power going to the USB ports. This one has power. Let's test out the light up here. And it is working. So let's see if this works. I wired it up to a pump that pumps from the water tank up in the front. Nice. I took a heavy-duty camp propane stove that I already had and figured out a way to build it into the trailer. It is set up to drop down with the hinges and hang outside. Although the position of the stove does block the sink somewhat, given the small space I was working with, I preferred to have easier access to the counter. So I attached the propane tank onto the side of the trailer. The steel angle is bolted down into the frame. It's time to add 1x2s to support the exterior wall and doors for the kitchen. I built the main kitchen door by starting with the frame instead of building onto the plywood as I did with the cabin doors. Once the framing boards were in place, I cut and attached the .106 plywood. Then I cut and glued the aluminum sheet as well as anchored the aluminum with metal roofing screws. As in the front, I used 3/4 inch aluminum angles to secure the corners. I carefully used my router to cut the gap between the back door and the frame. Then I added an aluminum T and installed the hinges angled to provide 270 degrees of rotation. Once the door was secured with the hinges, I could remove the temporary brace holding the door from the back and cut the rest of the door gaps. I added the aluminum T's around each edge of the doors. The movement of the stove door did not permit it to have aluminum T's on the bottom or right side, so I installed a Z-shaped aluminum piece on the bottom as well as half-inch aluminum angles to keep the water from flowing into the gap under the door. I added the cam locking latch from Amazon to the main kitchen door. I added a hook latch to hold the main kitchen door open and installed a simple latch to close the stove door. The roof was the last major part and also the most difficult. I wanted a lifting roof with built-in solar panels. It had to be light enough to lift, strong enough to support embedded solar panels, and weatherproof. I created a rectangular support out of 1x2s, being careful to fit the supports within the dimensions of the solar panels and supporting arms. Then I ran horizontal 1x2s between the solar panels and on each side. I also reinforced the front of the roof with the hinge with extra 1x2s. I added supports around the Fantastic Fan purchased from Amazon. I added 2 heavy springs to each lifting arm to cause the arms to naturally pull up into position. The lift arms are set up with the springs, one on the top and one on the bottom, and those pull back to keep the arms so that they are trying to stay in the upright position. I added a Z-bar aluminum piece that I purchased from DK Hardware Supply to the top of the trailer wall. Then I attached U-shaped car door edge guards I purchased from Amazon to the top of the Z-shaped aluminum. I purchased OtterTech's waterproof fabric from wholesalefabrics.com to seal in the loft. I just got a staple gun, just stapled it at the top, and so then the tent fabric will go up underneath that lip. Later, after a windstorm at 10,000 feet in the Sierra, I added small screws to secure the bottom of the tent fabric. The rest of the roof was finished similar to the walls by adding .106 plywood to the frame, followed by gluing and securing the aluminum sheet metal with roofing screws. Later, I added 1/4 inch foam insulation between the 1x2s that run the length of the roof and added interior .106 plywood. To seal the roof, I used a lot of Flex Seal. I put multiple coats on there, especially around these solar panels. I used some flat pieces of aluminum as well to seal in the gap between the solar panels and just coated them with Flex Seal. And after enough coats, everything has been sealed and it is watertight. Along the edges here, there's 2-inch aluminum angles, and so this allows for the water to go down around the top. So the hinge is a hurricane hinge that can be purchased from Vintage Technologies. There's a hinge underneath this rubber strip here, and I found that I had to add a piece of rubber to conduct the water up and over when the roof is up. Now when the roof is down, the water tends to flow towards the front of the trailer, and then it will pull up a little bit because it's a flat roof. So I added these little tubes right here. There's one on each side, and those allow the water to travel more easily out, and when it's up, the water just flows straight over this rubber piece. I used multi-purpose foam padding from Home Depot to pad the lounge, and I used a Nova Foam full-size foam mattress for the bottom bed. The space is actually a few inches short in length for a full mattress, but the foam mattress adjusted itself to the dimensions. The loft is a non-standard size, so I cut 2 sheets of foam padding to the size, and our kids just use sleeping bags. The top opens manually with a stepladder and a pole. It does require lifting about 50 pounds, so an improvement would be to create a powered lift. Once the top is almost fully extended, the springs kick in and hold it up. And for safety, there's a cable, and so this cable then runs down. There's a pulley. So the cable goes down, comes down to this pulley. Cable comes from this pulley from the top, and then there's a hook that it goes onto, and then they grab onto this beam, and that prevents that half of the beam from folding forward. And so there's one from the left side and the right side. Pull them tight. I fit these to fit with just the right amount of slack. These get hooked in to the eye bolt, just like that. They're counterbalanced so that if one pulls, one gets engaged, it weights against the other one, taking the strain off of the bolt. And this will prevent the top from falling down, even if the beams get pushed on to disengage the elbows that hold it in place. So let's take a look at lowering the loft. And so when I lower it, I unhook them off of the eye bolt, and I'm going to put them onto these two bolts like that. So what this allows me to do is to go around and pull the arms in so that they're ready to fall, and it releases the spring that's holding it together. So the spring is holding it up so I can't get it open, or I can't get it to go down. But once I pull it in just a little bit, the weight will rest on these bolts through the cables, and then I can come back around the back and I can release these bolts with the weight on it to then lower it manually. So how long did it take me to build the whole thing? From start to finish, it was 9 months to completion, so it was kind of like giving birth. But if I estimate the actual time working on it from the time-lapse video I took, I estimate it took me about 180 hours, or approximately 1 month of 5 days per week, 8-hour work days. If I did it again, I could probably build it in about 2 to 3 weeks of solid work time. I'm a teacher, so I completed most of the work while I was off during the summer. So how much does the trailer weigh? I have not weighed it, but given that I can lift up the tongue by hand, I don't think it weighs more than 1,500 pounds. How much did it cost to build? I made categorical estimates from my receipts, so here's the breakdown. I put a lot of features and extras into my trailer, such as solar power and a quality heater, so some of these costs could be reduced with a simpler design. The aluminum was especially expensive, partially because I had to order specially shaped pieces like the Z-bar online from specialty stores. The aluminum tees around the door were expensive too, so there may be a lot of room to cut costs on aluminum. It's important to note that I did not include a category for the cost of the tools needed for construction. It also cost me about $400 to register the trailer in California, but I was able to register it as a permanent trailer, so this is just a one-time fee as opposed to the yearly registration payment typically needed for most RVs. By the way, be sure to keep the certificate of origin that comes with the steel frame kit for registration. So the grand total is about $5,000. How does this compare to RVs with 2 beds capable of sleeping 4? Traditional teardrops can only sleep 2 comfortably, so the next comparison is to a travel trailer or tent trailer. These cost at their lowest price at least $15,000, but there are many additional expenses such as insurance, yearly registration costs, and storage. Used trailers can be purchased for less, but they will likely need expensive repairs that can be difficult to DIY. An RV dealer even told me that RVs are money pits. So my design is all about simplicity and making the most of what I have. I'm not trying to haul around a house on wheels, nor do I need to. I want to focus on getting the important things right: a comfortable bed, quality heater, and a kitchen to gather with my family in the outdoors. I don't need satellite TV, a microwave, and 20,000 pounds to haul around. Give me time to invest in my family and quiet time to seek the Creator, and that is enough for me.